Her voice brought comfort to a world at war, lifting spirits when hope was scarce. But behind the music, Petula Clark was trapped in an industry that exploited her, silenced her, and slowly broke her, leaving her to fight depression, betrayal, and a collapsing marriage no audience ever knew about. In 2023, at the age of 90, Petula Clark came frighteningly close to losing the very voice that had carried her through an entire lifetime. The woman who once brought comfort to a world at war had spent decades fighting battles no one ever saw. Behind the brightness of her music was a private history shaped by pressure, control, and emotional strain that followed her from childhood into old age. The truth of her life is not just sad, it is quietly devastating. Petula Clark was born Sally Alwyn Clark on November 15, 1932, in Epsom, Surrey, into a modest world shaped by duty and restraint. She grew up in a small home near Longgrove Hospital where both of her parents worked long shifts as nurses. Money was scarce, the Great Depression lingered heavily over working families, and nothing came easily. From an early age, she learned responsibility, helping with chores, caring for her siblings, and developing a patience far beyond her years. Those early lessons in care and endurance quietly shaped the softness and sincerity that would later live inside her voice. Her name itself carried a small spark of light. Her father, known for his gentle humor, combined the names of two former girlfriends, Pet and Ula, to create Petula. He said it sounded cheerful at a time when cheer was in short supply. She later confirmed the story herself, often smiling at how, even in difficult times, her family found room for imagination. That sense of warmth would follow her throughout her life. Even when circumstances grew cold, music entered her world naturally. Her mother, Doris, was a trained soprano and recognized something special in her daughter almost immediately. By the age of 5, Petula was singing folk songs at family gatherings, filling modest rooms with a calm that made people stop and listen. In a world unsettled by uncertainty, her voice created stillness. Those small moments built her confidence quietly, one song at a time. Everything changed when she was 7. In 1939, she stood on a small stage and mimicked popular radio singers, including Vera Lynn. Teachers noticed instantly and urged her to continue. Britain was on the brink of war, and a child with a clear, hopeful voice felt like something rare and necessary. Doors began to open. She performed more frequently, offering comfort to soldiers and families listening from home, becoming a presence people didn't know they needed until they heard her. Life at home remained simple and disciplined. Hospital schedules ruled her parents' lives, and Petula absorbed their steady compassion. Even as her voice reached radio audiences, she remained grounded, helping at home, listening carefully to others, and learning empathy not as a performance, but as a way of living. That empathy became inseparable from her music. By 1939, she was secretly recording her own demos on her father's old gramophone, whispering songs into the crackling speaker and imitating stars like Shirley Temple. When her parents discovered what she was doing, they didn't stop her. They smiled and let her continue. It brought her comfort at a time when fear was creeping into daily life. Then came the night that changed everything. On October 17, 1942, at just 9 years old, Petula sang Mighty Like a Rose on the BBC Empire service for a program called It's All Yours. She dedicated the song to her uncle, who was stationed overseas in Iraq. Britain was exhausted. Air raid sirens shattered the nights. Cities lived under constant threat. Yet her small, steady voice cut through the chaos. Hundreds of letters flooded the BBC afterward. People said she brought them peace. They asked to hear her again, and she did, singing even during raids, performing for children sheltering underground. By the end of 1942, she was appearing on BBC Radio every week. Soon she was given affectionate titles like Britain's Shirley Temple and radio's Merry Mimic. On December 20th of that year, she performed for more than 500 troops at the Queensberry All Services Club, later known as the Prince Edward Theatre. She sang patriotic songs, made them laugh, and lifted spirits heavy with fear. She was only 10, but she already understood how deeply people needed relief. Before she turned 12, Petula Clark had performed in more than 500 concerts for NZA. She traveled through blackout zones by train, visiting evacuated children and wounded soldiers. She sang while German V-1 rockets shook buildings around her. She never stopped. At 10 years old, she even began hosting her own BBC radio program, Pet's Parlour, where she sang, interviewed soldiers, read letters from families, and adjusted lyrics to fulfill personal requests. Each week she tried to lift someone's burden, and messages poured in from across the world. Long before fame, contracts, or control entered her life, Petula Clark was already carrying the emotional weight of others. Her voice became a refuge for millions, and that early responsibility, shouldered by a child during wartime, would quietly shape the strength she showed to the world, even as it set the stage for a lifetime of sacrifices few ever noticed. Even at that young age, Petula Clark understood something many adults never learn: how to make people feel seen. Her growing success on radio soon opened the door to film. In 1944, she appeared in Medal for the General, playing a street child who sang I'm Going to Be a Lucky Girl. Air raids were still striking the city when the film premiered, and audiences were living under constant threat. Critics praised her performance for its honesty and emotional realism, noting how natural she felt on screen. That role marked her true entrance into cinema, and she moved forward with quiet determination. During the Blitz, she sang in bomb shelters at just 8 years old. Families huddled together in fear as V-1 rockets shook the ground, and Petula would sing the white cliffs of Dover to calm them. Those moments required courage no child should have been asked to summon, yet they forged something unbreakable inside her. That strength followed her into every stage of her life. Even when circumstances turned against her after the war, everything changed abruptly. In May 1945, only weeks after VE Day, the BBC dropped her. She was 13 years old. Executives dismissed her as a wartime novelty, saying child singers were no longer needed. The rejection cut deeply. For the next 2 years, she vanished from the spotlight, attending secretarial school and quietly auditioning for West End roles. Rejection followed rejection. She was told she was too young, not the right type, no longer relevant. The glow of wartime admiration faded, and the industry no longer knew what to do with her. Still, she refused to give up. Even during that difficult period, her film work continued. At just 12 years old, she had filmed I Know Where I'm Going, shot in the Scottish Hebrides during one of the coldest winters on record. She endured freezing winds, relentless rain, and long days on remote islands without complaint. Crew members were stunned by her discipline and focus. That professionalism became a defining trait. In 1945, she starred in Strawberry Roan, playing a girl who loved horses despite never having ridden one. She trained for weeks, learning to ride ponies to prepare. The film was made on a tiny budget, but her performance stood out. Critics praised her emotional honesty and natural screen presence, confirming she was more than a singer. She could act with depth by 1949. She had already appeared in 14 films. Still a teenager but already a familiar face in British homes. One of her most beloved roles came in the early television series Here Come the Huggets in 1948. She played a witty teenager in a working-class family, a role audiences instantly recognized. The show's warmth and realism resonated deeply, and Petula's charm made her unforgettable. For 3 years, the series kept families smiling and helped her transition seamlessly from radio to film to television. At 16, she signed her first recording contract with EMI Columbia. Her debut single, I Can't Give You Anything But Love, failed to chart, but the session introduced her to producer George Martin. Nervous and unsure in the studio, she later recalled how he helped her relax and trust her voice. That early experience quietly planted the seeds for a long and enduring music career. Yet even as opportunities grew, darker pressures surfaced. In 1947, at just 15, her agent pushed her towards suggestive modeling jobs to increase her visibility. She refused every offer. Industry figures argued it would help her career, but she stood firm. She wanted respect, not shortcuts. That decision protected her at a time when many young performers were exploited, revealing a strength and clarity far beyond her years. By 17, she stepped into 1954 with a song that sounded playful but carried her straight into the spotlight. The Little Shoemaker was released that June and climbed to number 7 on the UK singles chart, staying there for 12 weeks. The song, originally French, was shaped into something bright and infectious, and it was suddenly everywhere. In Australia, it reached number 1, proving her appeal reached far beyond Britain. Released under the Polygon label, the record's success allowed her to begin transitioning from child performer to rising pop star. By the end of 1954, her voice was already a familiar presence in homes across the country, and the long, complicated path toward stardom was fully opening before her. 1 year later, in December 1955, Petula Clark's rise accelerated dramatically. There's a Valley pushed her further into the national spotlight, reaching number 9 on the UK charts and selling more than 200,000 copies, an impressive figure for the mid-1950s. She performed the song live on Sunday night at the London Palladium, a broadcast watched by nearly 20 million people. Overnight, she became a teenage sensation. The song's gentle, reflective tone fit her voice perfectly, and the exposure cemented her reputation as one of Britain's strongest young female vocalists. Newspapers sought interviews, radio stations wanted repeat performances, and audiences asked to hear her, the voice again and again. Another major step followed in early 1957 with All My Heart, which climbed to number 3 in the UK. The release marked a quiet but important milestone. Its B-side was written by Petula herself, signaling a growing confidence not just as a singer, but as a songwriter. She recorded the track at Abbey Road Studios, where she began experimenting with richer orchestral arrangements that hinted at the sound she would later perfect. The production felt warmer and more polished than much of the pop music flooding the charts at the time. She was learning quickly, writing more, and beginning to see a future built entirely around music rather than film. Around the same period, she made a bold and unconventional move. In 1956, she recorded in French for the first time with Chariot, the song that would later be known internationally as I Will Follow Him. The record topped the Belgian charts and spread rapidly across Europe. A British singer performing in French was rare and risky, but Petula trusted her instincts. The response proved she could connect with audiences beyond language and borders. By 1957, she was touring Europe extensively, performing dozens of shows in cities like Paris and Brussels with full orchestras. European audiences embraced her, making her one of the few British artists to achieve continental success years before the British invasion reshaped pop music. That momentum reached a new peak with Sailor in 1957. Song became her first UK #1, even outselling imported Elvis Presley singles that dominated record stores at the time. A carefully staged photo shoot aboard a yacht drifting down the Thames filled the tabloids and fueled public fascination. Sailor stayed at the top of the charts for weeks and confirmed her status as the highest-charting British female artist of the 1950s. Step by step, she proved she could succeed anywhere, with any audience. Her journey through the 1950s was not limited to music alone. In 1952, she appeared in The Card, her final major film role, before shifting her focus almost entirely toward singing. Between 1952 and 1958, she released an astonishing 5 singles every year and earned her first Ivor Novello nomination for songwriting. Few performers managed to move from film to music without losing momentum, but Petula did it with discipline and consistency. By 1958, she had become one of the most influential women in British pop, quietly shaping a path others would later follow. Everything changed again in 1960, when she made a decisive move to Paris at the age of 27. Signing with Vogue Records France, she released Romeo, which sold more than 1.5 million copies and transformed her into La Petula on the continent. Until then, she had been associated with gentle British ballads, but her French debut surprised critics and audiences alike. She quickly became a major European star, sharing stages with icons and filling prestigious venues like the Olympia Theatre. That artistic shift blended into her personal life when she fell in love with Claude Wolff, whom she married in 1961. Her success in France only deepened. In 1962, she released Ya Ya Twist, a lively French adaptation of a Lee Dorsey song. It remained at #1 in France for 12 consecutive weeks. A televised performance reached millions of viewers, capturing the energy of the twist craze sweeping Europe. She brought a softer but electrifying presence to the dance scene, and the song even reached the UK Top 20, a rare achievement for a French-language release. That same year, she won France's Grand Prix du Disque, officially recognized as the country's top female singer. More bold choices followed. In 1965, she collaborated with Serge Lama on Cette Maison, the French version of This Is My Song, written by Charlie Chaplin. At first, Petula hesitated, worried the simplicity of the lyrics might overshadow her work in the UK. Claude Wolff encouraged her to trust the song, and she finally recorded it. The decision paid off. The French version reached #1, reinforcing her ability to cross cultures, defy expectations, and succeed on her own terms. Even as the pressures behind the scenes continued to quietly build, the English version reached #1 in the UK in February 1967 and sold more than 500,000 copies. It became another defining moment, even as it created tension with her record label, which pushed for more chart success while she felt the song threatened to overshadow everything else she was doing. Still, it added yet another milestone to a career already filled with them. Around the same time, another door opened far from Europe. In 1963, Petula Clark toured Japan and made history by becoming the first Western woman to perform at the Budokan, a venue previously reserved for martial arts and national events. Her shows blended English and French songs, and Japanese audiences responded immediately. She outsold major local stars, her album topped the charts, and televised performances reached millions. For many viewers, she became their introduction to Western pop music, shaping musical tastes at a critical cultural moment. She continued pushing boundaries. In 1964, by recording in Italian and Spanish, one release went straight to #1 in Italy, and to meet the demands of multilingual sessions, she learned lyrics phonetically, often memorizing them overnight. Her Spanish and Italian recordings included adaptations of popular songs, performed with conviction and emotional clarity. Few artists at the time could move so quickly across languages and still sound authentic. Yet success did not shield her from inequality. In 1962, French promoters paid her only half of what male singers received on the same bill. Even though she drew equal crowds, she kept letters documenting the unfair treatment but chose to continue working, knowing visibility mattered more in the long run. That patience, though costly, helped carve space for women who followed. Then came the moment that would define her worldwide legacy. In 1964, Tony Hatch brought her a melody he had discovered in Paris. At first, she thought it sounded too American, but she agreed to record it. On October 16th, she completed the song in just 2 takes at the studio. Parts of the lyrics were finished minutes before recording began. More than 30 musicians filled the room, including future legends. When the song was released in the UK, it climbed to #2, held back only by the Beatles. But in the United States, something extraordinary happened. In January 1965, it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming the first US chart topper by a British female artist in over a decade. By the end of the year, it had sold more than 3 million copies, transforming her into a global icon almost overnight. Weeks later, she arrived in America for a live television appearance that sealed her place in history. On March 14, 1965, she performed on The Ed Sullivan Show, arriving just 45 minutes before going on air and singing without rehearsal. Nearly 50 million viewers watched. Her follow-up song quickly became another major hit, carrying her deep into the heart of the British invasion. The music spoke directly to young audiences, offering the idea of belonging at a time when cultural and racial divisions shaped everyday life. The richness of the arrangements and the warmth of her delivery made the songs feel larger than pop, almost communal in spirit. Then in April 1968, a quiet moment on live television carried unexpected power. During an NBC special, Petula Clark performed an anti-war duet with Harry Belafonte. As they sang, she gently touched his arm. The gesture was brief and unplanned, but it became the first time a white woman touched a black man on primetime American television. Sponsors panicked and demanded the scene be reshot, fearing backlash. She refused. Her husband, who produced the show, supported her decision. When the program aired unchanged, the reaction was immediate and intense. Letters poured in from across the country, some filled with gratitude, others with threats. What had lasted only seconds became a defining statement. Without speeches or slogans, Petula Clark had crossed a line that many were still afraid to approach, proving once again that her legacy was built not just on music, but on quiet courage at moments when it mattered most. Not every experience behind the scenes was positive. In 1968, while performing in Las Vegas, she encountered Elvis Presley privately in his suite. He made an advance that she rejected immediately. She later described the moment as deeply uncomfortable. Known for pushing boundaries, he was often shielded by those around him. Petula walked out, kept her distance, and remained professional. But the impact of that moment stayed with her long after the encounter ended. Her Grammy success carried its own act of defiance. In 1966, she won Best Rock and Roll Recording for I Know a Place, but she refused to attend the ceremony. Female artists were being paid less than male performers, even when nominated in the same categories. Her absence was deliberate. It wasn't widely publicized, but it became one of the earliest visible protests against gender pay inequality in the music industry. Later artists would point to that decision as a rare act of resistance during a time when most stayed silent. Her career shifted repeatedly, especially between the ages of 40 and 60. The early 1970s brought difficult transitions as disco swept through the United States. Her 1971 single, I Don't Know How to Love Him, reached number 13, but planned US tours were cancelled due to weak ticket sales. The setback was jarring, but she adapted. She turned toward cabaret and smaller venues in Australia and Asia, reshaping her approach. In 1972, she toured Australia with a small band, leaning into jazz standards and intimate storytelling rather than spectacle. The shift allowed her to rebuild on her own terms, trading scale for connection. By 1974, she returned to British television with a BBC variety series that ran for 12 episodes, reaffirming her ability to evolve without losing herself, even as the industry around her continued to change. One unforgettable night, David Bowie appeared while shaping his young American sound, stepping into the middle of his own artistic rebirth. The moment carried a quiet symmetry. Both he and Petula Clark were standing at the edge of new versions of themselves. Her show also welcomed names like Peter O'Toole, Telly Savalas, and the Pointer Sisters, drawing attention back to her at a moment when she needed it most. Though she had moved to Geneva in 1966 to raise her family, the pull of the stage never left her. In the 1980s, she returned to the West End with Someone Like You, and in 1984, she performed more than 200 shows at the Strand Theatre. The production blended her classic hits with new material, and audiences responded immediately. Critics praised her authority and warmth. At 52, she proved she could still lead a major production and hold a crowd with ease. Then came another unexpected turn. In 1988, she released Downtown 88, a high-energy remix produced by Stock Aitken Waterman. It reached number 10 in the UK and introduced her to a new generation of dance music fans. Appearances on Top of the Pops brought her back into mainstream conversation, and suddenly her name was familiar again to listeners who hadn't grown up with her music. At 55, she reinvented herself once more, not by chasing trends, but by stepping confidently into them. Behind the applause, however, familiar battles continued. In 1975, she discovered that a US label was paying her 40% less than male artists for the reissue of one of her albums. She took legal action. The case settled quietly, but it became another early example of a woman refusing to accept unequal treatment in the music industry. In 1991, she stood before a different kind of audience, performing at the Royal Variety Performance for Queen Elizabeth II. Her gown shimmered as she sang Downtown and Don't Sleep in the Subway, watched by millions. It became one of her last major royal appearances, a moment that reflected her enduring place in British culture. At she took on yet another challenge, stepping into Sunset Boulevard on Broadway as Norma Desmond. She completed 15 preview performances before a sudden health issue forced her to step back. Even so, her work left a lasting impression. She later recorded the studio cast album in 2001, earning a Tony nomination, an uncommon achievement at her age, but entirely consistent with a career defined by persistence and range. She continued surprising audiences well into her later years. In 2013, at 80, she recorded Lost in You in Nashville, blending her signature style with country influences. The album charted in both the UK and France, connecting with younger listeners while remaining true to her roots. 2 years later, at 82, she walked onto the Glastonbury stage before more than 100,000 people. When she sang Downtown, the crowd erupted. The performance went viral, and the moment reminded the world how deeply her songs were woven into collective memory. Her memoir, released in 2024, opened doors she had kept closed for decades. She shared stories fans had never heard, including a surprising confession that she once turned down a duet with the Beatles in 1965 due to a scheduling conflict. The book became a bestseller because it balanced triumph with honesty, success with shadow. Readers wanted the truth in her own words. In 2022, her 90th birthday concert at the Royal Albert Hall pushed boundaries again. Holograms of her younger self appeared beside her on stage, creating duets across time. 5,000 filled the hall, and more than 1 million watched online. Memory and technology blended into something deeply emotional, reshaping her legacy once more. The following year brought fear. In 2023, she contracted COVID and required vocal cord surgery. For the first time in more than 80 years of performing, she worried she might lose her voice, but she recovered. By 2024, she was back on stage across Europe, singing with the same calm strength that had carried her. Through a lifetime, her personal life unfolded with its own mix of devotion and distance. She married Claude Wolfe on June 8, 1961, and he managed her career for decades. Over time, their marriage changed. By the 1990s, they lived largely separate lives while remaining married and raising their 3 children. When Wolfe died in March 2024 at the age of 93, she described the grief as overwhelming, saying she was left without words. The quiet distance that had existed between them in later years only made the loss heavier, forcing her to confront decades of shared history that had slowly grown apart. Motherhood carried its own cost. Throughout the 1970s, she flew constantly between Geneva and Las Vegas, balancing family life with relentless professional demands. The distance, the travel, and the expectations never fully eased. Yet through every chapter, public and private, Petula Clark continued forward, carrying both joy and sacrifice in equal measure, a life shaped by resilience long before the world ever learned how much she endured. She tried to give her children the time they deserved, but the schedule never truly allowed it. Tours ran long, commitments piled up, school events were missed, holidays slipped by. Her performances suffered, and so did her family life. Years later, she admitted she lived in a constant pull of guilt, trying to be everything at once, and feeling that neither side ever received enough of her. That tension never fully left her. It simply became something she carried quietly. The industry tested her in darker ways as well. In 1965, a producer invited her to a hotel room under the pretense of business, then attempted to corner her. She escaped, shaken but silent, knowing that speaking up could cost her everything she had worked for. Moments like the uncomfortable encounter with Elvis Presley later that decade were not isolated incidents. They were part of a wider pattern faced by women in entertainment, where silence often felt like the only form of protection. Survival depended not just on talent, but on restraint. That sense of vulnerability wasn't new to her. Years earlier, at just 13, she had already felt how quickly the industry could discard someone. After entertaining troops throughout World War II, the BBC dismissed her as irrelevant once the war ended. The rejection triggered a depression she kept hidden, shaping the guarded way she moved through fame for decades afterward. Even as her voice brought joy to millions and her songs sold in staggering numbers, she struggled privately with wounds that success never healed. Therapy later in life helped her begin untangling that pain. From years of industry betrayal to the quiet unraveling of her marriage, for the first time, she learned how to make space for her own healing. Yet even integrity came with consequences. After the 1968 television moment with Harry Belafonte, threats followed. Letters arrived filled with hate and warnings. Sponsors panicked. Networks pushed for safer alternatives. But she and her husband destroyed the alternate takes. The moment stayed. She toured with armed security afterward, fully aware of the risk. She chose integrity anyway. That choice followed her through the rest of her life, not as a headline, not as a scandal, but as a quiet constant. Petula Clark's story is not just one of success or survival. It is the story of a woman who carried responsibility too early, endured pressure too long, and still refused to erase herself to make others comfortable. Her career was shaped by courage, reinvention, and a voice that refused to disappear, even when the cost of using it was far higher than the world ever knew.